Hi everyone, my name is Jocelyn and welcome to my project. So I picked sickle cell disease because one reason I work in the blood bank and we transfuse a lot of anemia patients, especially due to sickle cell disease. We'll learn something from me today. So what is a sickle cell or sickle cell disease? So my friend over here says sickle cell, he says he cannot carry enough oxygen. My friend says, but sometimes my friend hemoglobin is deformed and my shape becomes long and sickle shape. Then I became sickle cell. Sickle cell disease is a gene mutation. So back on our lecture during cellular level. So, when a genes and the chromosomes encoding region sequence of protein can affect the amino acids. Sickle cell disease affects the RBC, the red blood cell, which transport oxygen from the lungs to the tissue in our body. So a sickle cell anemia is an inherited disorder caused by a point mutation affecting a single nucleotide in a gene that encodes the B-globin chains of hemoglobin. There's all kinds of sickles. The normal sickle hemoglobin is the A. So our body get rid of old red blood cell, but with sickle cell disease, they can't see it when it reaches to the spleen. So not having enough hemoglobin, red blood cells to carry oxygen to our body, to our tissues. So that's when anemia comes in due to abnormal cells. And also, once it sickles, individual is having a crisis and it will never go back to its normal shape. Basically, a sickle cell disease or a sickle cell anemia is a single mutation in hemoglobin that cause red blood cell to sickle, and then once it sickles, it enables to bend, so it becomes sticky over time. With sickle cells, it sticks. So this is when patient or people starts to get really, really, really sick when it happens. So when sickles, it calls sickle cell crisis anemia. Back in our lecture in respiratory, why is red cell hemoglobin and all that fun stuff is very important. So in our respiratory, the external respiration where gas diffuses from alveoli to our blood, from blood to other tissue. So how are O2 and CO2 transported to our body? So blood plasma cannot transport by itself. So O2 or CO2 meet the physiological needs. So how do we solve this problem? So it's on our lecture. So through the red blood cell. So the transport of O2 and CO2 from peripheral tissues removes O2 and CO2 from the plasma, allowing gases to continue to diffuse through our blood. So that's when we can breathe by having enough oxygen. So how is oxygen transported through our body? O2 binds to the ions of hemoglobin molecules in a reversible reaction, forming hemoglobin O2. So each red blood cell contains millions of hemoglobin molecules. So, but with sickle cell disease, a single genetic mutation, it alters the structure of hemoglobin after releasing oxygen to the tissues. So mediated proteins lock together into rigid rows, causing it to shape into a long, pointed sickle. So that's why they call it sickle, because it's long and pointed. So common symptoms for having a crisis: signs and symptoms: fatigue and weakness, frequent infections, pain, crisis, swelling in the hands and feet, pale skin or jaundice, delayed growth, shortness of breath, vision problems. So how is this sickle cell crisis triggers? So this is just the common, trigger symptoms: poor sleep, dehydration, weather changes, stress, and infection. So the reason why this sickle cell really brought to my attention, because in the lab where I work, we transfuse a lot of sickle cell patients, especially in the winter. So with the weather changes, so I noticed the colder it gets outside, the more this patient gets really, really sick. So like when I work in blood bank, I was like, why is this like every winter we have so many anemia, like all kinds of anemia patients? And it's just, it's the weather. How sickle cell anemia looks like. So normal red cells, again, it's that round shape, and with the sickle cell, it's pointy and sticky. So that's making it to clog. So despite of all the symptoms and signs and all these diseases, so there are some treatment for sickle cell anemia. So again, in blood bank where I work, we do blood transfusion. So by doing blood transfusion, we'll give that person who's in crisis a new population of, red blood cells that won't sickle. And with the new population of red blood cells, we'll give the body better oxygenation. So besides blood transfusion, there's also antibiotics, usually for children 3 months old, reduce the risk of infection and inflammation due to compromised immune system. Antibiotic is not a cure for sickle cell disease, but a tool to manage related complications due to infection.
They also give patients pain medicines. Doctors also or physician recommend drinking plenty of water. By doing so, it could prevent and the pain. So stem cell transplant, they only do it for a patient that's really severe, to replace a patient's faulty stem cell, a healthy ones, allowing it to form and produce a normal red blood cell. But there's a disadvantage of stem cell. That's why they don't do it often, because it could edit, a person or a patient's DNA. It could change their blood type and etc. So note that only patient with severe sickle cells, I mentioned, controlled with medication, is eligible for stem cell transplant.
How the sickle cell looks like inside the microscope. So that's your normal red cells here, and that's your sickle cell right here. Sickle cell anemia, by doing a physical examination that may include feeling your spleen or your liver, they'll ask about your symptoms, particularly the pain in your arms, your legs, or belly, or etc., etc. So they may ask about your medical history, including infections. They may also order the following tests. So in the lab where I work, it's usually done in hematology, where they do the CBC, the differential, and all kinds of slides. So some in St. Joe's where I work, we don't do sickle dick screen, but some other hospital like Upstate and Krause, they do a sickle dick screen. Basically, it's a confirmatory in-depth hematology to confirm that patient really have a sickle cell. There's also another test what's called hemoglobin electrophoresis. It's also known as a high-performance liquid chromatography test that analyzes your hemoglobin to find and measure the abnormal hemoglobin that causes sickle cell anemia. Also, there's also another genetic test. Your provider may order tests to see if you have the genetic changes mutation that cause sickle cell anemia. So when you're constantly like sick, so this is when your physician, order this following test. Important to know where all the sickle cell disease all start. So a patient in less than a year old, patients suffer from repeating episode of stabbing pain in oxygen. So each symptoms determines specific part of our organs. So back in our organs, in the lab. So for example, our spleen, part of our immune system, puts patient into a risk of dangerous infection. And our lungs, fevers or difficulty breathing can also affect with this patient with sickle cell disease. And in the eye, clog in the eye can cause vision problems and retinal detachment. So this is how sickle cell disease inherited. Because again, this is caused by a gene mutation, so it runs through your genes. So I remember back in biology when we had that class, the test cross class. So this is just a brief, key form how a patient inherit, that the genes or the sickle cell disease. So this is like the mom, the dad, and the mom. So a gene for hemoglobin A, which the mom, and the mom had a gene for hemoglobin S. So this is the parents. So they're both sickle cell trait, and then when they have children, so one of the children out of 4 can get the sickle cell disease. And to summarize all this sickle cell disease, scary anemia that could literally kill a patient, a baby, or anyone that it don't get treated. There's an advantages for this sort of disease. So despite of this malignant mutation, it is originally evolved as a beneficial adaptation for those where it's originated in Africa. So this is against protection for their body, fight against malaria disease, like a mosquito parasite. So in Philippines, where I came from, we have dengue. Malaria is more malignant than dengue, but a lot of kids die from dengue in the Philippines. So anyway, some researchers have been able to trace the origins of sickle cell anemia mutation. It originated from Africa. So it's in tropical places, regions, especially in Africa, as I mentioned. Parasites found in a local mosquitoes, which is the malaria, uses RBC as an incubators. The sickle cell shaped red blood cell make them more resistant to malaria. So this patient get a mosquito bite and get a malaria, so they don't get really sick if they have this sickle cell trait, which is there's an advantage for malaria. It is like a protection or shield for them. Therefore, it's an advantage thing, as I mentioned. So a child inherits a copy of the mutation, again, as I mentioned, only from one parent. There will be just enough abnormal hemoglobin, basically making it difficult for the malaria parasites. So therefore, it is a voluntary advantage on those countries. Because we have a lot of immigrants, and I'm one of them. And this is why I see this sickle cell a lot in the lab, or we transfuse them a lot. So that's why I was just so curious. I was like, why is this patient so sick? What's causing them? And that's when I heard about sickle cell disease and all that fun stuff. So by inheriting it from both parents, which resulted in a sickle cell anemia. Thank you guys for watching, for listening, and to my professor, Professor Beth. You're such an amazing professor. Thank you so much. And I hope you guys learned something new from me today about sickle cell disease or sickle cell anemia. And good luck on our finals. Good luck with your career, your school, and whatever it is that you're going for. Stay safe.